What if everything you thought you knew about the war was a lie? While the West poured billions into military aid, sanctions, and political pressure, Vladimir Putin was playing an entirely different game, one they never saw coming. Despite being hit with what was supposed to be crippling economic sanctions, Russia not only survived but emerged stronger. The ruble didn't collapse, it rebounded. The Russian economy didn't crumble, it adapted. And while Western leaders celebrated premature victories, Putin was quietly executing a masterstroke that would leave the world stunned. From the moment the conflict began, Western powers were confident. Sweeping sanctions, international isolation, and military support for Ukraine were supposed to bring Russia to its knees. Analysts predicted economic collapse, political turmoil, and even the possible downfall of Vladimir Putin himself. The world watched, waiting for Russia to break. But something unexpected happened. Russia didn't just survive, it adapted, evolved, and fought back with a strategy that left the West scrambling. While NATO and its allies played checkers, Putin was playing chess. He turned economic sanctions into opportunities, strengthened key alliances, and reshaped the global balance of power in ways no one saw coming. Was this a desperate leader clinging to power? Or was it a calculated move years in the making? In this video, we uncover the masterstroke that allowed Putin to outsmart the West and shift the tides of war. What was his secret strategy? And what does it mean for the future of global power? Let's dive in. It all started with a bold gamble, one that sent shockwaves across the world. When Russian forces crossed into Ukraine, the West responded with a barrage of sanctions unlike anything seen before. Banks were cut off from the global financial system, billions in assets were frozen, and multinational corporations abandoned Russia overnight. Western leaders stood united, convinced that these measures would cripple Putin's war machine and trigger economic collapse. The Russian stock market plummeted, the ruble nosedived, and panic spread through Moscow's financial district. For a moment, it seemed like the strategy was working. Experts predicted food shortages, mass unemployment, and widespread unrest. The media was flooded with headlines proclaiming the beginning of the end for Putin's regime. But behind closed doors, Russia was already adapting. Rather than breaking under pressure, Putin and his advisors executed a strategy that no one expected. They turned to alternative trade routes, forged new economic partnerships, and made decisive moves that would turn Russia's so-called downfall into a shocking resurgence. The world was watching a war of weapons, but Putin was waging a war of strategy, a masterstroke that would leave the West struggling to keep up. But how did he do it? What hidden moves changed the game in his favor? The answers are more surprising than you think. As Western sanctions tightened their grip, many expected Russia to crumble under the weight of economic isolation. But instead of retreating, Putin did something completely unexpected. He turned the crisis into an opportunity. While Western nations scrambled to adjust their policies, Russia was already moving pieces on the global chessboard, setting the stage for a masterstroke that no one saw coming. One of Putin's first moves was to weaponize Russia's vast energy reserves. Europe, heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas, found itself in a precarious position. When sanctions blocked Russian energy exports, Moscow responded by slashing supplies to Europe, triggering an energy crisis that sent gas prices soaring. Countries that had once confidently backed Ukraine suddenly faced skyrocketing electricity bills and economic turmoil. Protests erupted, industries slowed, and political divisions widened. Putin had flipped the script. Rather than Russia suffering, it was the West that found itself struggling to keep up. But energy was just one piece of the puzzle. While the West sought to cut Russia off from the global economy, Putin quietly strengthened ties with China, India, and other non-Western powers. Trade agreements were swiftly signed, allowing Russian exports to flow eastward instead of westward. In a stunning twist, the Russian economy began to stabilize, with new markets replacing those lost in the West. Even the Russian ruble, expected to collapse under sanctions, made a shocking recovery, fueled in part by a bold move, demanding that gas exports be paid for in rubles instead of dollars. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, another unexpected shift was happening. While Ukraine received billions in military aid from NATO, Russia adapted its tactics. It ramped up domestic arms production, secured weapons from alternative suppliers, and unleashed a hybrid warfare strategy that combined cyber attacks, misinformation campaigns, and strategic military offensives. Every Western attempt to tighten the noose around Russia only seemed to make Putin's position stronger. So, was this all part of a long-term plan? Had Putin anticipated these sanctions and prepared for them in advance? Or was he simply outmaneuvering the West in real time, exploiting their miscalculations? The answer lies in the masterstroke that changed everything. One final move that would cement Russia's resilience and leave the world in shock. Then came the moment that no one expected, the final stroke in Putin's grand strategy. As the West doubled down on sanctions and military aid to Ukraine, Russia executed a move that shifted the global power balance in its favor, the creation of an alternative economic order. For decades, the US dollar had been the backbone of global trade. Sanctions worked because they relied on the dollar's dominance in the financial system. But Putin had a countermeasure, one that had been years in the making. In a bold move, Russia, along with China and several other allied nations, accelerated efforts to de-dollarize international trade. New financial networks were established, bypassing SWIFT and Western banking controls. Suddenly, Russia wasn't just surviving sanctions. It was actively building an economic system that the West could no longer control. At the same time, Russia deepened its partnerships with China, India, the Middle East, and even parts of Africa and Latin America. While the West expected Russia to be globally isolated, Putin was expanding his influence. Trade routes were rerouted, military alliances strengthened, and new energy deals secured. Europe, once dependent on Russian gas, found itself competing with Asian markets that eagerly absorbed Russian exports. But the most stunning revelation came on the battlefield. After months of grinding conflict, a strategic shift occurred. Russian forces adapted to NATO tactics, using advanced drone warfare, electronic countermeasures, and strategic offensives that forced Ukraine and its allies into difficult positions. Western military analysts, once confident in Ukraine's eventual victory, began to acknowledge the growing challenges. The war wasn't going as planned, and Russia wasn't losing. It was adjusting, evolving, and in some areas, even gaining ground. And then came the final psychological blow. Western unity began to fracture. As economic pain rippled through Europe and the US, public opinion shifted. Protests erupted in Western capitals, questioning the cost of supporting Ukraine. Political leaders faced mounting pressure to rethink their strategies. Putin had done the impossible. He had outlasted, outmaneuvered, and outplayed the West on multiple fronts. But was this just the beginning of a much larger geopolitical shift? Or was the world now witnessing the rise of a new global order, one where Western dominance was no longer guaranteed? In the end, what was supposed to be Russia's downfall became Putin's greatest strategic victory. The sanctions meant to cripple his economy instead pushed Russia towards self-reliance and alternative global partnerships. The military aid meant to weaken Russia only forced it to adapt and evolve its tactics. And the Western unity that once seemed unshakable began showing cracks under economic strain and shifting public sentiment. But what does this mean for the future? Has Putin permanently reshaped the global power structure? Or is this just a temporary shift in the ongoing battle between East and West? One thing is certain, Russia's resilience has proven that economic warfare is not as straightforward as once believed. The world is no longer divided into clear winners and losers, but rather into those who can adapt and those who cannot. As we look ahead, the question remains, has the West truly learned from its miscalculations? Or is Putin's masterstroke just the first step in a much larger geopolitical game? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into global power struggles. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into global power struggles and geopolitical events. What do you think? Did Putin outplay the West? Or is there more to the story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who would find this analysis interesting, share this video to spread the discussion. Stay tuned, because the battle for global influence is far from over.